No, the investigation starts as soon as you get assigned the case.
Okay.
But they were briefing me on all of the information and details from the previous day. The incident, as far as when the agency was made aware that there was a problem or that the hospital or the paramedics had been called regarding Layla. So it started from there, and they brought me all the way up to speed until that morning.
Okay. And that's November the 18th we're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. After the November the 18th staffing and briefing, what are the next steps that you take as part of your investigation?
To ensure that the next day, I want to say we have a representative at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Dr. Greenbaum, normally in a situation like this, her team will do a forensic on the children, so we want to make sure we scheduled that. So I made some phone calls to try to ensure that we did take care of that. And in the meantime, I think I spoke to the coroner because that's how I found out when the autopsy was going to take place. And I believe that I called the daycare centers, or at least one of the daycare centers, because I was trying to verify whether or not the girls were actually enrolled in daycare.
And when I want to talk about the daycare centers, what information did you have at that point in your investigation as to daycare attendants involving Millie Place and Laila Daniel?
The daycare center that I called, the first time I...
At this point, she's about what she did as part of the investigation, what information she got in order to continue with her investigation.
The information is on person who made a statement, statement objection.
What daycares did you call?
I think it was Ola. It was Bethany Church, but I spoke to the representative who stated that she was in.
And not telling me what anyone said to you, just who you called and who you reached out to, but not what information you received. So you said you called Ola Academy.
Yes.
And was there another daycare that you called?
There may have been one other, but I know I called Ola twice because of Millie's name. Okay. There was Millie Place. I used Millie Rosenbaum. And there was in her mother's last name, Clenending. So I know the first time I called, I can't remember the exact name. I think I said Millie Place. And then when I had the additional names later on in my investigation, I called back to make sure that she could check her records to see if Lily or Layla had ever been enrolled based on the names that I received from the investigation.
And you said you called another daycare. Which was that daycare?
I can't recall the name.
If looking at your report, would that help you to recall?
It may. It would be Ola Academy and Bethany Baptist Church.
Did you ever make a call to Turning Point in regards to daycare?
No.
Okay. Had you ever heard of Turning Point prior to me just saying Turning Point?
I mean, I've heard of Turning Point, but I didn't call anybody in Turning Point in the case at all.
As far as your investigation of the case, did Turning Point become one of the daycares that you needed to reach out to?
No.
You said you called the daycares. Anything else that you did as part of your investigation?
Everything in the investigation?
Yeah, what's the next step that you took?
I attended the autopsy. I spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Lambert and their daughter.
I'm sorry. When do you recall speaking to Mr. and Mrs. Lambert?
It was around the 23rd, I think, because the autopsy was that Friday. I think it was November 20th.
And why did you speak with the Lamberts?
I spoke to the Lamberts because it was stated that in the brief.
Without telling me what anyone said to you, what was the purpose of you meeting and speaking with the Lamberts?
In the staffings, it was brought up that the Lamberts had.
You're saying what happened in the staffing.
If not telling me what someone said, did part of your investigation lead you to speak with the Lamberts?
Yes.
Okay. And did you speak with the Lamberts on more than one occasion?
No.
Okay. And after speaking with the Lamberts, what is the next steps that you took as part of your investigation?
I went to the gym.
Okay. And what gym did you go to?
Gym Tech for Kids.
Okay. And do you recall when you went to Gym Tech for Kids?
I spoke to Miss Matheson, the director.
Okay. And did you do anything else while you were at Gym Tech?
I took pictures of the gym as far as where the children interact. The left side of the gym was for the bigger kids, and you could tell on the right-hand side that was for the smaller children, where Millie's class would participate on the right-hand side.
After going out to Gym Tech, did you do anything else?
I asked them if they had any incident reports regarding Layla or Millie ever being hurt, and they did not have any. And I asked about attendance, and she gave me the attendance records, which I added in to my record.
Did you review that attendance record?
Yes, I did.
Did you find that Laila Daniel attended Gym Tech at all?
No.
And after visiting where else did your investigation lead you, or other calls that you needed to make as part of your investigation?
I spoke to a former foster care worker, a former foster care parent, Ms. Brown, who had the girls prior to them being placed with Ms. Lambert.
And let me ask you this, prior to starting your investigation, at any point do you review the history of Millie placing Laila Daniel to determine the reason that they were in care?
The history was provided to me during our formal staffing of the case.
At any point during your staffing of the case or your review of their history, did you review or learn anything about physical abuse for the reason of them being in care?
I can't recall if it was physical abuse. I know that drug use regarding their mother was a part of the case.
Okay. And after speaking with Ms. Brown, what did you do next as part of your investigation?
Well, I spoke to Ms. Brown. I spoke to Mr. and Ms. Lambert, their daughter. I spoke to Ms. Battle and another person on her team, a Ms. Burke. Spoke to both of them because I was informed that Ms. Rosenbaum was an intern with them, and to ask them any questions that they, I asked them questions regarding their observations of her.
What's the next thing that you did as part of your investigation?
Attended the autopsy, spoke to the foster parents, I also received, I went to Ms. Banks' house. Ms. Banks, Peggy Banks is the great grandmother to Layla and Millie. And I went to her home to interview her and to receive information. And I went back out to her home a second time after I received a phone call from one of our state office representatives who stated,
without telling me what anyone said, when you went back out the second time, what did you do?
I was going out because I was supposed to address a situation where there possibly was a hole in her backyard that Millie and Layla could have hurt themselves in a hole in Miss Banks' backyard. So I went back out to interview Miss Banks, and she lives in a senior community. They're like some townhomes, like a semicircle. So it's very flat. And I was able to go to the backyard through Miss Banks' sister, Kim, her baby sister Kim's room. Miss Banks' sister's bed blocks the sliding glass doors to the back, so she had to move her bed. I walked out, I took pictures of the backyard, and it's like tiled, and it goes like if you're standing, there are certain areas where if you go all the way out, you can look down to behind the other neighbor's home. So it's very flat. If I had to estimate in feet, I think I wrote it in my documentation, it's not a large space at all, but it's very flat back in that area.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 390 through 396. If you can look at that.
And this is also the front yard, which kind of shows some of the community.
And first, do you recognize States 390 through 396?
Yes, these are the photos that I took when I went to Miss Banks' house, and it shows the front yard and the backyard.
Do they accurately depict what you observed when you went out there that day?
Yes, they do.
The statement asks that States Exhibits 390 through 396 be admitted into evidence.
Admitted 390 and 396.
They may be published.
Yes.
And this is States 390. If you can tell me what we're looking at here on States 390.
That's the front yard. That's at Miss Banks' front door, looking out of her front door.
Did you observe any holes in the front yard of Ms. Banks' home?
No, I did not.
And this is States 392. What are we looking at here in 390?
That's on the side of the house.
And did you observe any holes on the side of the house in Ms. Banks' home?
No.
And States number 395. What are we looking at here?
This is the backyard, and actually you can see the unit that's outside, and then the next unit is the neighbors. And that's what I was saying, as far as if you're the neighbor, you can walk out and just walk all the way around, because that is the paved area of what it looks like in all of the backyards.
And did you observe any holes in that paved area at all?
No.
What about up on the hill in this grassy area?
No, I didn't observe anything in the area where I could see. I didn't observe any holes or anything in that area.
And then States Exhibit number 396.
This is the other side. So the pictures that you just showed, that was, if I'm standing at the back door looking out, the first picture was to the left, and this is to the right.
Thank you. And after speaking with Ms. Banks and taking photographs of her front and backyard, what else did you do as part of your investigation?
I asked her if she had any additional information. She could send it to me. I thanked her for her cooperation. She shared that she was, her term, she herself, Ms. Banks, was a military brat, and that she mentioned that Ms. Rosenbaum told her she was in the military.
And if you cannot tell me what someone told you, just tell me the steps that you took.
So
as
after
part
I
of
was
your investigation.
okay. So after I was informed about Ms. Rosenbaum being in the military, I called National Guard and requested information. I was sent minimal information, but it was a certificate that stated that she was in the National Guard.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 389, which is a self-authenticating business record from the National Personal Records Center. State's 389, we ask that it be admitted into evidence.
Admitted.
Yes, this is a copy of the certificate that was sent to me.
And according to this certificate, yes, what class did the defendant Jennifer Rosenbaum hold in the Army National Guard?
I can't recall that, whatever it would, I didn't write down.
You can look behind that, but it's clear enough for you to see.
Private first class.
And is this her discharge certificate?
This was the certificate that was sent to me.
Okay. And according to this certificate, when was she discharged?
May 2013, May 23rd, 2013.
At the end of your investigation, are you required to make a determination as to your findings?
Yes,
And what were your findings in this case?
we substantiated the case.
And what did you substantiate the case for?
Physical abuse and it was definitely physical abuse.
Okay. And if looking at it, would it help that
Yes.
to refresh your recollection?
1 second. Withdraw.
Substantiated for,
And I asked if you could just look at it, don't read it, and
Okay.
when you're done reading it, if you could then look up.
So I could impose an objection that I'm giving the province of the jury by letting the defects testify as to whether it's been substantiated or not, and so I would object to that. And that's the motion to strike.
Well, Judge, I think that those are two different things. The jury is here to decide the criminal charges as to whether or not these defendants are guilty. DFACS can talk about the findings of their investigation. That has nothing to do with the jury, has to do ultimately.
Why do you have any case?
I do not, at this moment, Your Honor, I do not believe that.
I do not, Judge, this is not. I'm not asking them for their findings for the criminal charges, just as to DFACS.
Hold on.
Ma'am, what were your findings?
for Laila Daniel, we substantiated for neglect and physical abuse, and for Millie Place at that time, we substantiated for physical abuse.
Against two?
Mr. and Mrs. Rosenbaum.
Nothing further.
Good morning, Ms. Hicks. My name is Kareem Moe, and I just have a few questions for you. In your investigation of the front yard, can you tell us exactly where you went here,
That's at the front door.
and where did you physically go yourself?
This area, my car is actually, one of the two cars that's parked in the back.
You did not go into this area, did you?
No, I had to walk, her driveway is right there, so I had to walk to the driveway in order to get to the front door. So that is just her yard between the white car and the red car.
So you did not go into this area at all? You did not walk in this area? You stayed on the sidewalk, isn't that true?
On the cement, yes.
You did not go up into this area and check it for holes, did you?
No, I walked to the back of the paved area.
Okay, so you stayed on the paved area?
Yes,
And you did not go and examine the backyard for any holes?
no.
On the State's Exhibit 396, did you go up into this area here, or did you stay on the paved area?
Stayed on the paved area.
So you did not go up into this hilly area,
No,
and you did not go beyond the fence, did you?
no.
There's an opening, the fence just ends here, right? There's an opening that somebody can get through, correct?
I can't answer that.
You don't know?
I can't answer that because the way the fence is there, I mean, that's how it looked on the day I went out there. I didn't see any openings where a person could get through,
But you didn't go up there?
but I did not go up there.
Now, Ms. Hicks-King, you and Ms. Arno Carr interviewed Millie, correct?
Yes,
And you knew that children should be interviewed by forensic interviewers, correct?
Yes.
And are you or Ms. Arnold Carr forensic interviewers?
No.
But nevertheless, you went ahead and asked Millie questions, correct?
Yes.
And you did that prior to her going into a forensic interview, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you scheduled that interview for the next day,
The interview was already scheduled.
okay? But somebody scheduled it, right?
Yes.
And isn't it true that Millie told you her elbow hit her knee?
Yes.
So it wasn't a matter of she not knowing. She said that she didn't know how she got some of the bruises, but she knew her elbow hit her knee, correct?
Yes.
And you spoke to Miss Samantha White, correct?
Yes.
She answered all your questions, right?
Yes.
She did not have legal representation when she was talking to you, did she?
No.
And she told you that Millie was a rough girl and she played hard, correct?
Yes.
And she told you the girls could be aggressive towards each other.
She said that they could be aggressive.
And she also told you there was plenty of food in the house. Isn't that true?
She did.
And you met with the Lamberts, correct?
Yes.
And did you discuss with Miss Lambert, Miss Banks at all?
Miss Lambert brought Miss Banks up.
And said what?
She stated that she,
Object to hearsay.
Response?
Withdraw. Now, did you at any point in your investigation find any document or talk to anybody that suggested that Tessa Daniel asked for her child to be removed, her children to be removed from the Rosenbaum home?
state the question again?
In your investigation, isn't it true that you did not find any evidence that Tessa Daniels asked for her children to be removed from the Rosenbaum home?
No.
You didn't find any evidence of that, correct?
No.
Am I correct?
It was not verified.
You did not find any information.
Correct. I did not find verification that it was requested that Tessa had made any.
Now, you asked Miss Banks to tell you if anything further came up, correct?
Yes.
Did she ever call you and tell you that Millie said that Joseph Rosenbaum beat her in the back?
No, she did not.
Did she ever call you and tell you that Jennifer Rosenbaum was drunk, yanking the children up and down the stairs?
No,
Don't
she-
object, Your Honor, because I think this calls for hearsay. She's asking what Ms. Banks said to her.
It's impeachment, Your Honor. Whether she has heard, whether Miss Banks said that to anybody. Miss Banks claimed, Miss Lambert, I'm sorry, whether Miss Lambert said that. Miss Lambert claims that happened, and I'm just asking this witness
Ms. Lambert claims that what happened?
that Jennifer was drunk and yanking the children up and down the stairs, and that Joseph Rosenbaum beat Millie on the back. And that was said by Miss Lambert to have been what Millie said. And I'm now asking whether Miss Banks, she testified on direct, Miss Lambert was directed to call her with any further information. Did she call you with any further information?
Let's have the jury step out, please.
They're not listed on here. It's in my record, on my notes. The 2 dates that I went to Ms. Banks' home. The pictures were taken on the 2nd date.
Let me show you, ask you, these assist you. Look at the notes, see if this helps.
The notes that you showed me, these are not the correct, these are the beginning, kind of toward the beginning of the case, because these are marked with 11/18. It was past, it was after November 18.
So it was after November 18th.
Correct.
And so she is alleged to have fallen in a hole before November 17th, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't go out there till after November 17th?
Correct.
Okay.
See if this helps helps you narrow down that date.
December 14th was the second date that I went out.
Was that the date you took the pictures?
Yes.
Thank you. One moment, please. And with regards to the date that you gave Ms. Young, that's not a date that you came up with on your own, is it? The date you gave Ms. Young?
The date regarding,
October, the last date in October that the children are alleged to have been seen by Ms. Banks. That's not something you determined. That's information you got from someone, correct?
I received it from Ms. Banks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ma'am, you can sit there and let your step on the back door. The state calls the next witness.
State calls Anique Whitmore.
All right, here.
Have you raised your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do, yes.
You can have a seat.
Thank you.
And if you could introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the court reporter.
Yes, it's Anique Whitmore, A-N-I-Q-U-E, Whitmore, W-H-I-T-M-O-R-E.
And Ms. Whitmore, how are you currently employed?
I am a psychotherapist in private practice. I have been a psychotherapist since 2001 and licensed in the state of Georgia.
And prior to having a private practice, where were you employed previously?
Prior to private practice, I was the forensic director at Fulton County District Attorney's Office. There, I worked in a specialized unit called Crimes Against Women and Children. And in that unit, we specialized working with the vulnerable population, such as children who have endured some sort of trauma, whether that be child molestation, rape, women who have endured domestic violence, witnessed a traumatic event, stalking cases, child exploitation, human trafficking. And so I would work with the attorneys as well as the victims of cases when trial was coming upon us, as well as helping the attorneys understand the psychodynamic portion of memory recall, child development, how trauma affects the individual.
How long were you employed at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office?
I believe it was about 7 years.
Prior to working at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, where were you employed?
Prior to the DA's office, I was the clinical and executive director of Harbor House, which is a child advocacy center that covers all of Northwest Georgia. My duties there were very similar to my prior employment to the Harbor House, which is the Georgia Center for Child Advocacy, where I was the program manager. And so there, and in both advocacy centers, I supervised the clinical staff. I conducted forensic interviews, conducted forensic evaluations, had supervised the clinical staff as well as individuals who were in graduate school and local universities who would come and conduct internships. I would do training, teach the public on child sexual abuse and witness to traumas, how memory affects that. I would educate and work with multidisciplinary team members such as law enforcement, Department of Family and Children Services, the medical profession, attorneys. And so in combination of the two advocacy centers, that was about 8 years of my career, 9 years.
And what is your educational background?
Sure. So my educational background is I have my undergraduate degree from Northwestern University in Illinois, majoring in education and social policy, minoring in counseling psychology, and my graduate studies are also from Northwestern University, getting my master's in counseling psychology.
Now, as part of your education and your training, have you also studied trauma and how trauma affects memory?
Most definitely.
And as part of your education and your training, have you also studied the process of disclosure, how a child discloses abuse?
Yes, I have.
Now, as part of your employment working in the CACs, as well as being the forensic director in Fulton County, have you personally experienced how that process of disclosure works?
I have. So not only have I experienced it as a clinician, but as a forensic specialist, and I also teach in the area. There are several forensic protocols that exist, one being Child First, which used to be called Finding Words. And it is a protocol that was brought to Georgia in the early 2000s when the governor's office reached out to about 7 or 8 of us to educate those who are involved in the investigation process in Georgia, which would include law enforcement, DFACs, forensic specialists, therapists, medical profession. And so we train all of those professionals in the state of Georgia 4 times a year. It's a 40-hour week course. And part of that course is just that, the process of disclosure, how trauma affects an individual and their memory, child development and what we can expect from a child of a certain age, what they can and what we should expect them to say, what we shouldn't expect them to be able to recall and verbalize.
And are you familiar with the literature and research in the area of forensic interviewing, as well as the process of disclosure and how trauma affects memory?
I am, yes.
And are you a licensed mental health professional?
I am.
Now, we talked a little bit about the CACs. What is a Child Advocacy Center?
Sure. I could talk for weeks on this. However, a little bit of history. Back in the 70s, when there was abuse of children, and when we say children, we're talking from the ages of about 3 to about 17, or if you're cognitively functioning within those age range. There was investigations conducted that were not the best because there were inappropriate questions asked, leading questions. And so it was in the late 70s, early 80s when there were some major types of cases that went south. They didn't turn out well. And so the powers that be created child advocacy centers so that those individuals were specialized in questioning children of specific ages so that we can gather credible information and then further explore that information. And so employees of an advocacy center most advocacy centers across the country are nonprofit, independent agencies, not hired by law enforcement, but we are a unit that explores allegations or reports of abuse in a non-biased way so that a child can come in and have a fair representation of what they are saying that they've experienced through well-trained individuals. And so it's a center that provides support with those who have reported some sort of trauma. It provides the forensic interview, even evaluation, and intervention. It educates the public. And so a main piece of an advocacy center is just that, is the forensic interview. It becomes a piece of the investigation and the file.
Now, you mentioned that you have done some training in Child First, previously Finding Words.
Yes.
How long have you been doing that training?
I believe since 2001 I was contacted. So I guess 18-ish years.
And how many forensic interviews have you conducted?
Myself, I have conducted close to 1,000 taped forensic interviews.
And how many forensic interviews have you reviewed?
Unfortunately, probably quadruple that. I consult on many cases across the country, actually, that involve forensic interviews, and the majority of those clearly are not the ones I've conducted. So to date, my guesstimation would be close to 3,500 to 4,000 forensic interviews.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert witness in court before?
I have.
Have you been qualified in the state of Georgia?
Many times, yes.
Have you been qualified in any other states?
Yes.
And have you been qualified in any other jurisdictions, like federal jurisdictions?
I have. So to date, I've testified in about 32 different jurisdictions, ranging from different states, different types of court, superior, juvenile court, family court, federal court, as well as in the military. I will provide my expertise in cases in which service members have been accused of certain crimes, and they will call me in to become their specialist or consultant in court-martial cases.
Now, in the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, have you reviewed a forensic interview as well as an entire case file and recommended not indicting or not prosecuting a case?
Many times, yes.
And when you did recommend a case for indictment or for prosecution in the Fulton County DA's office, did you also provide your expert testimony in court?
Often, yes.
And have you ever been consulted by a defense attorney but then asked not to testify?
Many. I always say, when I'm asked that question, I always say that my work stands for itself. I will consult and give my expert opinion. However that opinion benefits is not up to me. It's up to those who consult with me. So whether that be for the state or for the respondent or the defense, it's been in my experience when I do consult with the defense, I'm not oftentimes called to testify.
Now, in conducting forensic interviews, approximately what percentage of those interviews were with allegations of physical abuse?
Mm-hmm. I don't break my cases down. I have testified about 390-ish times in the court of law. And I don't break each of those types of cases down, but what I will say is I would guesstimate about 20% of those cases, because when I was involved at the child advocacy centers, of course, we would interview victims of sexual abuse as well as severe physical abuse or witness to physical abuse. And whether or not those cases would go to trial is beyond my control, but I would guesstimate about 20% of those cases.
Your Honor, at this time, I tender Ms. Whitmore as an expert in forensic interviewing and child abuse.
All right, she's asked for forensic interviewing and child abuse. Any objection to your expert here of child abuse?
I haven't heard anything that qualifies her as a child abuse specialist.
No response.
Response?
Your Honor, she just testified about her education and her experience. She talked about that she trains people in the area of child abuse, including the process of disclosure and how trauma affects memory. She studied it. She's also personally had the experience with individuals through her forensic interviews as well as through her therapy. She still trains currently and has been training at Child First since 2001 regarding forensic interviews, and part of that is the process of disclosure and how trauma affects memory.
I'll accept her as an expert in these areas.
Thank you. Ms. Whitmore, prior to your testimony here today, what documents or evidence did you review in connection with this case?
In this case, and as well as many other cases, I will review what's considered a discovery, which would entail forensic interviews, medical reports, defects records, mental health records. And so in this particular case, it was those. It was mental health records, defects records, as well as several different forensic interviews.
Now, why is it important to review more than just the forensic interview in evaluating and rendering an opinion on a child abuse case?
Sure. So I see it as a pizza or a puzzle. There are many pieces to it, and the forensic interview is just one piece. It is a mere section of the whole picture. Without it, you're missing a good chunk, because in a forensic interview, most likely it's going to be a child between the ages of 3 and 17. They're being asked questions that are appropriate to their age, and so in that manner, because we're trained in such a way, it elicits that information from that age of child. But there are many other pieces that would corroborate or not corroborate what that child is saying in the forensic. So to enter in and just use a forensic would be, in my opinion, somewhat unethical, and so you need to look at various pieces to see if they fit or see if they don't fit.
Well, a few questions about forensic interviewing. Is it a nationally approved and accredited process?
It is, yes.
And are the techniques used in forensic interviewing evolving?
They are definitely evolving. Forensic interview is much like any other profession. If you are in the world of IT, what you knew in 2000 might be very different than in 2019, although it might work. Whatever you're using, there just may be a better model that exists or a different technique. So it is an evolving practice.
And have there been studies done on how best to conduct a forensic interview?
There have been many.
Have you ever seen a perfect forensic interview?
Never. I have never conducted one, have never consulted on one. I'd like to say I've conducted one myself, but I have not, because that involves personality, it involves the individual in front of you, and because we are human, we are imperfect.
Now, can you have a close to perfect interview when a child who has been abused refuses to disclose abuse?
Oh. Personally, as a forensic specialist, I have had many that have refused to disclose, because there's many facets that come into play when working with a child or a victim of any age. There needs to be comfort. There needs to be an understanding of what's being asked. What are the dynamics? What do they know, and why do they know they're there speaking? Do they know perhaps what the repercussions might be if they were to disclose? Are they embarrassed? Are they afraid? How old are they? Many dynamics take place.
Now, you have reviewed the forensic interview of Millie on November 18, as well as the interview of Millie on December 28.
That's correct.
Okay. And to be fair, would you agree that those two recorded interviews did not follow protocol?
I would agree.
Now, however, can you have a less than stellar interview with leading questions and failure to follow protocol, and a child will still truthfully disclose abuse?
Oh, most definitely. That goes into the question that you previously asked and what I testified to, that there is no perfect interview. And even though there may be borderline questions asked or inappropriate questions asked or tactics used, that does not mean that the information shared is inaccurate or not credible.
Now, can anybody bring a child to a child advocacy center and have the child interviewed?
No. So the governor's office has an office that focuses on children and the protocols of how that office or the state wants you to approach children. Whenever there is an act or an allegation, a report of abuse or trauma or witness to, the protocol states that they get a forensic interview. And so that is the child abuse protocol of Georgia, is that there has to be an open investigation for a interview to be requested of a CAC.
And so if a disclosure of abuse occurs prior to the forensic interview, that would mean that the child has already spoken about the abuse.
Most definitely. When a child comes to CAC, 98% of those individuals have already disclosed knowing, witnessing, experiencing something.
So as a forensic specialist, you would expect a child to have discussed the abuse with other individuals prior to seeing them in an interview.
Definitely.
Now I want to turn your attention to the issue of suggestibility.
Okay.
Can you describe what suggestibility is when referring to a forensic interview of a child?
Sure. So suggestibility is just a word that we use that the forensic interviewer in the room is perhaps suggesting something that they perhaps shouldn't to the individual they're asking questions to. However, we are all suggestible as humans. Being suggestible is as simple as saying, oh, I think it's cold in here. So I'm looking at you, shivering, suggesting to you that you should be cold because I am, and I'm shaking my head. When working in the forensic aspect, we want to try. Our goal is to ask non-suggestive, non-leading questions. However, when working with children and special age children, there are questions that can be considered suggestive but are not horrible. Because if I were to ask, say, a 5 or 6 year old, so tell me about today, or tell me about your day, but I want to know about this day, not about, yesterday. By me saying, tell me about today, since waking up, that is somewhat suggestible versus tell me about what happened on October 23rd. That is suggesting I want you to talk about that day. But that doesn't mean that it is the response you receive back is not credible or inconsistent.
Now, when a child corrects an adult who's asking about the abuse, does that indicate a child is resistant to suggestion?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. When a child during a forensic interview corrects an adult, and does that mean that the child is resistant to suggestion?
Yes. So when a child is able to correct the interviewer, it is a good sign that they are able to fight suggestion, meaning they hear a question that is suggesting something, and that child is able to say, no, that's not what I said, or that's not what I meant, this is what I meant. That is something that I look for when reviewing a video or a forensic, whether or not they have the ability, the maturity to correct the superior in the room. Not so much the superior, but the adult perhaps in the room.
Now, when a child is able to distinguish between what they personally observed versus what they were told, does that indicate a resistance to suggestion?
Most definitely. So we always encourage a child or an individual to speak about what they've seen, what they can personally tell you versus what they heard on a telephone or through a closed door. So that is another way of displaying a child's ability to fight suggestion.
And are you familiar with the research on suggestibility and what it tells us as it relates to children and repeated questioning of children?
Yes.
And what is that?
Sure. The younger the child, the more suggestible they are. However, research would support, my professional experience would support that even if a child is continuously asked questions and has already showed the ability to fight suggestion, no matter how many questions they are asked, they are still able to provide their experience or their knowledge, their exposure to what they're reporting.
Now I want to ask you about contextual details. In the area of forensic interviewing, what are they? What are we talking about when
Sure.
you mention that word?
Contextual details are the who, what, where, when, what something smelled like, looked like, what happened next, what happened before, what did you do then. It adds context to the disclosure, to the report of what that individual is experienced. If you are talking with an individual and there are gaps, there's no context, it leaves the listener to wonder. So you're looking for that context. Who was there? What did someone say? What were you made to do? What did you see? What did you hear? It provides depth to their report.
Now, what, if anything, is the importance of contextual details as they relate to the issue of suggestibility?
Mm-hmm. The more detail that an individual is able to provide, it provides more reasons to be able to identify that child was not suggested or was not, her experience or his experience was not suggestible because of that context, because of that depth of information. But you then have to look at the age of the child also. You have to look at their verbal ability. How many words are in the repertoire to be able to describe what they've experienced? If they have been exposed to something that most other 8-year-olds, 3-year-olds have been exposed to, they only have their words to be able to describe what they've witnessed.
Now, I want to turn your attention to Millie's November 18, 2015 interview. What, if anything, was significant to you about the fact that Millie without prompting, describes the cream that the defendant, Joe Rosenbaum, put on her bruises and describes it as smelling like old people and making her skin hot and cold.
For me, as a specialist in the area, that is a genuine, spontaneous, contextualized detail. That is something, a response like that is what she put into her mind as a memory that was important to her because it stood out. It was the smell, what something looked like, where it was applied, where it was, laid to rest, or where it was, sitting on the counter or wherever. That's context. It provides depth.
I want to turn your attention to child abuse and the process of disclosure. What does that term, process of disclosure, mean?
Sure. So just that, it is a process. So it's not a one-time event. It takes time to formulate what you witnessed, what you experienced into words and who it is that you're going to tell. The analogy that I always typically give, because I'm very visual, so it helps me understand also, is we have all experienced some sort of trauma in life, whether it be a loss in job, a pet, a family member, a relationship. When someone asks you about that traumatic event right away, you may have few words to describe it because you haven't processed it. You may be too emotional, you may be too traumatized. However, a year later, 2 years later, perhaps there's some sort of intervention, time distanced from the traumatic event. You're able to speak about it in more detail. You're able to provide more context because you're not as emotionally attached to it. So if someone called you and told you that your mother was diagnosed with cancer, in that first probably 10, 12 hours would be very difficult. Perhaps after remission or treatment and remission and years of health, you're able to speak about that in more detail. That is a disclosure, the process of disclosure. What questions are being asked in an appropriate way for you to be able to describe your experience?
Now, what, if anything, can family dynamics have on a child's willingness to disclose?
So family dynamics, there's a key relationship, there's a key dynamic in what I know in this profession is oftentimes we are traumatized not by strangers so much, but those that we love and care for and are cared by. And so that dynamic of being traumatized perhaps by those that you love the most affects your ability to tell detail, the rate at which you tell that detail or report. Because as an individual, you're worried about repercussion. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to me? Will they still love me? Will everyone hate me because of it? Will they get in trouble? So there's a lot of dynamic, especially when you know the offender.
Now, can children have conflicted feelings towards their abusers?
Most definitely. The layperson, and I thought this at one point too, that if you hurt me, I'm going to hate you or despise you and be done with you. But in my experience and what literature will show is that those who are abused or have been affected by the offender in some sort of way and they're related to them, there's that dynamic of confusion and still love and you still care for them. You still want to be in their presence. And so someone on the outside may see a relationship that seems tight because the victim perhaps is still loves that individual. I see that all the time, and that's actually one of the in the therapeutic side of what I do when I work with clients. That's one area in which many survivors struggle with is, but I still care for them, but they did this. How can I love someone and they did this? So it occurs all the time.
So would it surprise you if a child appears happy and acts lovingly or loves on their abuser while in a public setting?
No.
Now, if an adult dresses, feeds, clothes, buys the child toys, takes them to community events, takes them to their job and their school, does that mean that the person is not abusing the child?
Absolutely not, no.
What does a child abuser look like?
I wish we had a vision of it, right? I, in my 20-year, 22-year career, have seen a little bit of everything. There is no identified face. Abusers can range from mothers, fathers, daughters, sisters, pastors, priests, coaches, neighbors. There is not one identifiable face.
Now, based on your training and experience, is it common or uncommon for a child to provide some details of the abuse to one person and different or additional details to another?
That's what's most common, is that some detail is shared with one and other details are shared with another. It depends on the questions asked. It depends on the child's comfort ability, their ability to give detail based on their age. Unfortunately, in the system, at times cases can span across years. And so if you're speaking to an individual when they're 10 and are now testifying when they're 18, of course, different information might be spoken about.
Based on your expertise, is it surprising to you that a child will disclose abuse to one person and then later refuse to acknowledge or even talk about the abuse when asked by someone else?
It does not surprise me.
And how come?
Typically, when an individual talks about what they've experienced, their world gets turned upside down. People get mad, people get in trouble, they get looked at like, you must be lying, they lose loved ones in their life, perhaps they're put into defects custody, the ones they love the most are no longer around them. And so what better way than, a child's mind to take all that back and to make the world go back to normal than to say it didn't happen or deny that they know information. So I see it all the time, literature supports it. Does it make for an investigation to be difficult? Most definitely, but it happens often.
Based on your expertise, can a child's fear of returning to live with the abuser have an effect on their willingness to disclose?
It can, yes.
And based on your expertise, can a child who sees their abuser in court after 4 years, can that affect their willingness to disclose?
Oh, most definitely.
Now, based on your expertise, if a child is in a home where one adult is doing the physical abuse and the other adult stands and watches and is otherwise aware of the abuse, can the child have more positive feelings to the one that's standing by versus the one that is actually committing the physical acts?
They can. Again, every individual is different and may have different response. Children are very concrete, and so they know what they know. And when something is happening concrete to them, such as a physical abuse in this analogy you're giving, and the individual who's watching, that child, depending on their age, may not realize that that individual had the ability to stop it, and they may find them as less abusive or less mean. So yes, the affection towards that other individual may appear as though is increased or more than the individual physically touching that child.
Have you personally reviewed cases in which adults were in the home at the time the abuse occurred and failed to protect the child?
The majority of the cases I have involve that scenario.
And based on your expertise, is it surprising to you that Millie didn't immediately run and tell either her great-grandmother or biological mother about the abuse at the time it was happening?
It does not surprise me.
And how come?
What we know about abuse cases is that the type of disclosure, the most common type, is delayed, meaning the act occurs and one doesn't find out about it for weeks, months, years later. Again, dynamics of how old is that child? Do they know what to say or to tell? Do they have a support system in which they have the avenue in which to tell? Do they know to report it? What we know in this field is that the younger the child is when they're enduring abuse, that's their normal. It's not for us to judge, but unfortunately that's their world. And so they don't perhaps know that it's okay to report that it's not okay. The analogy that I give, again, analogies, but if you were to tell a young child that that's pink on the wall, they will not know that that's not pink until taught differently, until they learn their colors in school. So if you're being beat in this scenario or abused in some sort of way from a young age, although it's painful and it's an experience, but if it's being conducted by someone that is supposed to love you and you know no different, that's their norm.
Have you personally reviewed cases where other children were in the room at the time the abuse occurred and either didn't witness the abuse or just denied ever witnessing it?
Oh, yes.
I want to turn your attention to the issue of memory.
Okay.
How does one store memory?
Again, could be here for 40 weeks to talk about this, but won't. Memory, our brains are pretty magical. We store what's important to us. We store happy memories in one place, we store traumatic memories in another. The traumatic ones get pushed way back in the back of our head behind a closed, locked door. It takes special questions and specified sequencing of those questions to be able to elicit those memories. Again, like I testified earlier, we've all experienced something in which we don't want to talk about. And we don't want to talk about it with a bunch of strangers for sure, but if that stranger allows us to be comforted, ask us questions that are not too traumatic, we're able to access those memories. So those memories are accessed in questioning of the context. Where were you? How did it make you feel? What did you see? How is it making you feel now when you're talking about it? I see you're uncomfortable. I see you're emotional. How can I help you remember? Or how is there something that you can recall? It's in my experience that oftentimes individuals remember, they just don't want to talk about it. So if someone if I were to ask an interviewee, tell me about A, B, and C, and they say, oh, I don't know, I don't remember. A response of mine is usually or typically is that you don't remember or you don't want to speak about it. Because speaking about it is like ripping off a scab. You have to go to that place. And who wants to go to that place? So depending on what you recall is important. So if you are abused and what was most important to you was what tool that individual used, was it their hands or was it a hammer? Was it a belt? Was it a book? That might not have been important to the victim, but the person who used it was. So that's what the child is going to remember. It's what we find important is what we store.
Now, How are children with remembering specific dates?
Oh, they stink. Some adults are really poor at remembering dates and details. And then you have to look at the age of the child, because have they learned that in school even? Have they mastered that technique? Do they know that when important events happen, that they're to go back into their calendar and write it down? The younger the child, of course not. And especially if multiple acts of abuse occur, what they know is what happened to their body or what has happened to somebody else. Not necessarily it happened on October 5th at 2:02. They just know that they experienced it and they know who did it to them or did it to the other person.
I want to turn your attention to asking you some questions specifically about this case here in court. So in this case, based on your expertise, is it surprising to you that on the day of Layla's death, when Millie was in the hospital, she did not tell anyone that the defendant, Jennifer Rosenbaum, was physically abusive to her or Layla?
It does not surprise me.
And how come?
So trauma works in mysterious ways. Our brains, again, work in magical ways. If we're talking about this case specific, based on the information that I reviewed, this child presents, or excuse me, the older child presents as more parentified, meaning she was in situations in which she was caring for her younger sister. In that manner, was she protecting her by not sharing all that she knew? Did she know what to say? Did she know what was going to happen? Was she afraid? Was she in shock? We don't know those answers. But what I do know, and what literature would support, is that, and it's recent literature that came out in the last 2 or 3 years, in that when you are a trauma victim, witnessing or experiencing it, you need about a 48-hour, you need 2 sleep cycles, so about 48 hours, to be able to focus on what it was you experienced, to be able to put words to it, and to be able to describe that to somebody else. Because again, that's how our brains work. We need time to recoup, we need time to process, and especially the younger you are, you need more time to understand.
Now, based on your answer to that question, on the morning of November 18 of 2015, about 15 hours after Layla's death, Millie had her forensic interview. At that time, Millie doesn't disclose abuse, but does acknowledge some of her bruises. Does this mean that Millie's subsequent disclosures are tainted?
Absolutely not.
And is that primarily because of that sleep cycle, 48 hours you discussed?
It's primarily because of a couple things. That sleep cycle, as well as the process of disclosure that I testified earlier about, is that it takes time to formulate what it was you experienced. Again, here's an analogy for you, but it's as if you were in a car accident, and in that moment you're like, oh my gosh, no, and it happens so slow, and you don't want to remember the details of it, but in 2 days, perhaps you're able to speak about it, to give more details. Oh, that's right, I was at the stoplight, and I thought it turned green, and it didn't, and so I turned. More details come. It's that process of disclosure.
Now, after Layla's death, Millie lives with the Lamberts and begins to disclose abuse. The interview that was done is not done in a forensic setting. However, does that mean that Millie's disclosures are tainted?
It does not.
Does it mean that she's inconsistent?
It does not.
But it means she's improperly suggestible?
It would not.
During the course of Millie's disclosures, were there certain facts that were consistent throughout the board?
There were consistent facts, correct.
Now, based on your expertise, what, if anything, is significant to you about the fact that Millie consistently said Jennifer told her Layla choked on chicken?
It's significant because of the word told. You have to really break down what children say, individuals, adults. And when Millie was further questioned, it wasn't that she saw it, it was told to her. When a caregiver or someone of authority is in a child's life, tells that child something, such as choked on a piece of chicken, it's something that she heard, she didn't necessarily visualize, and that's what she stuck to. That was her understanding.
And based on your expertise, what, if anything, is significant to you about the fact that Millie consistently says Jennifer told her Layla hurt her leg in gymnastics?
Again, it was the told. It wasn't that Millie was there witnessing it. It was something that she was told.
And based on your experience, what, if anything, is significant to you about the fact that Millie, immediately after Layla's death, told both the ER nurse and the forensic interviewer that Layla died before the ambulance got there?
It was significant, in my opinion, because that, to me, is something that she saw. That was her understanding because of her physical presence in that home. Because she described what it was that she saw. She spoke about it. She wasn't told. It was what she experienced. Again, you have to look at the vernacular, what words a child uses to describe what it was that they've experienced. It's that context.
Is it at all surprising to you that Millie was preoccupied by death after Layla died?
Not at all.
Is it at all surprising to you that Millie struggled with issues of trust?
Absolutely not. The individuals that were put into Millie's life were there to protect and care for her as caregivers. It is those people in her life and any other individual's life, that's who you're to trust. And when that trust is broken, that unfortunately, in my experience as a therapist, is a struggle that perhaps Millie may face throughout her life, trusting those that she technically should be able to.
Those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you, Ms. Whitmore.
You're welcome.
Ms. Andrews-Cross.
Thank you. Good morning, actually.
Good
Ms.
morning.
Whitmore. My name is Kareem Mull, and I've got a number of questions to ask you.
Sure.
What exactly did you review?
If I recall correctly, forensic interviews, several forensic interviews. I reviewed mental health records. I reviewed defects records.
You did not see the interview of Jennifer Rosenbaum, did you?
Your client?
Jennifer Rosenbaum.
Oh, Rosenbaum. No, I did not.
You did not look at that?
No.
There are 50 discs in this case. Which one of those 50s did you look at?
The interviews of Millie.
That's all you looked at?
That's correct.
And you are a child advocate, correct?
No, I am a psychotherapist working in the area with children.
But you have worked in child advocacy units, haven't you?
No, I was the director of forensic services at the DA's office. I was the director of 2 advocacy centers. Do we advocate for children? We advocate for what they have to say.
And that is absolutely correct. You're here today advocating for what children say, correct? Well, specifically for what Millie said.
No, I disagree. My understanding of being here today is to speak about my experience in the area of child abuse, my expertise, my experience as a therapist, my experience as a director, the 20 years I've taught in the area. Again, I shared with the court that it has been in my career that I have testified for both sides, and so I speak to my expertise, not advocating for one individual over another.
How many times have you testified for the defense?
I don't have a number, but I've testified close to 400 times. I would say a small percentage. Just last week, and in 2 weeks I go to Alaska to testify for the defense. I do not have a specific number.
So you don't know how many?
I don't.
Now, you were talking about Layla knowing that Millie knowing that Layla had died before the ambulance got there.
That was a question asked of me, yes.
Yes. And are you saying here that this 4-year-old or 3-year-old at the time knew the child was dead?
I can't speak to truth. I can speak to what I review because I was not there. What I testified to was based on what was asked of me and what the child said. And it is Millie's understanding that her sister was dead prior to the MEs getting, or to the MEs get, not MEs, but.
Did you review any of the defects records which talked about Peggy Banks coaching Millie?
I did.
Okay. Did you read any of the records of Donna Wazorek,
Refresh me of who that is.
psychologist for Millie?
Yes,
Did you review the records of Ann McCullough?
I did.
Okay. Now, you have said that when she says that Layla died before the ambulance got there, you earlier said she saw Layla die, is what you interpret from that.
I interpreted the verbiage that she used in comparison to choking on chicken. She was told she was choked versus she died.
But as you sit here today, you don't know if that child died before in front of Millie, do you?
Me personally, I
Yes.
do not know.
You don't know if that child died in the ambulance or on the way, do you?
I don't personally, but looking at records that I've read, I know what has been concluded.
But you don't know whether the child died in the ambulance, on the spot, or in the hospital.
Me
do you?
personally, I do not. I did not declare her death.
And you were not there present.
That's correct.
And you do not know that Millie saw her die. You do not know that.
I do not.
Is there anything, Ms. Whitmore, anything a child would say in the context of a forensic interview that would surprise you?
Oh, I have been surprised many times.
Thank you. That's all I have.
You said that you've been surprised many times. Tell me about those surprises.
How much time do you have? I have been surprised at the language used. I have been surprised by the details provided. I have been surprised at what children have had to endure in witnessing and physically feeling. I have been surprised at the emotion or lack of emotion of a child and what they've endured and what they've reported. I have been surprised in human nature in what individuals have done. I have been surprised in, oh my gosh, I could just speak a ton. I have been surprised many times.
And when you are reviewing forensic interviews, as you did in this case, are you also looking for signs of coaching?
Oh, all the time.
And in these 2 interviews that you reviewed, did you see any signs of coaching?
I did not.
And during your review of forensic interviews, you also look for issues of suggestibility.
I do.
And do you also look for any red flags or any issues that would suggest a child is suggestible?
I always do, yes.
And specifically with Millie, was there any indication that she was suggestible?
I will say there were questions that were asked that were suggestible. For me as a specialist in the area, that does not mean it's a negative. Again, there's no perfect interview, and you have to look at the answer given to that suggestive question. If there's context provided in that answer, the who, the what, how something felt, what did you see, what did you hear, what happened next, it solidifies that child's experience. In addition to that, I will look what else is supporting what that child is saying. Are there corroborating pieces of the puzzle that will support what this child says? So just because a leading question is asked or a suggestive question does not negate what that child does have to say.
Now, in terms of the language Millie used, was there anything surprising about her language?
There was not.
And in terms of the details Millie used, was there anything concerning about those details?
There was not.
And in terms of what Millie endured, was there concern about what she endured?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Nothing else? Thank you, ma'am. You can step down.
Thank you.
Any objections for this being excused? And you're free to go.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our mid-morning break. We'll see you back here in 15 minutes. We're ready to go. State call, next witness.
At this time, I'll be reading the stipulation into the record.
All right.
And I have marked it states exhibit 397 for identification purposes. The following stipulations of facts and evidence agreed to by the state and defense. On November 23rd of 2015, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence. A sealed package containing 4 tubes of abdominal blood, 1 tube of central heart blood, 1 tube of bile, and 1 jar of gastric contents. All tubes were identified as collected from Laila Daniel. Forensic toxicologists from the GBI analyzed the evidence and made the following conclusions. The evidence did not indicate the presence of ethyl alcohol. The evidence did not indicate the presence of barbiturates, certain benzodiazepines, common opioids, ibuprofen, amphetamines, cocaine, or cocaine metabolites. Additionally, the comprehensive drug screen was negative. Number 2. On February 7, 2018, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence. A sealed package containing a towel. On February 8, 2018, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence via forensic biologist Melissa West. 2 cuttings from the towel. Melissa West, forensic biologist, analyzed the cuttings and made the following conclusion. Chemical examination of the stains on the towel did indicate the presence of blood. Number 3. On November 23, 2015, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence. A sealed package containing a blood-stain card labeled Laila Daniel. On March 22, 2017, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence. A sealed package containing buccal swabs identified as collected from Joseph Rosenbaum. On May 25, 2017, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence. A sealed package containing buccal swabs identified as collected from Jennifer Rosenbaum. Ashley Hinkle, forensic biologist, analyzed the cuttings from the towel and made the following conclusion. The cuttings from the towel contained the profile of one individual, that of Laila Daniel. Number 4. On November 24, 2015, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence. A sealed package containing a butter knife collected from the kitchen sink. On March 15, 2016, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence via forensic biologist Melissa West. A swabbing recovered from the blade of the butter knife collected from the kitchen sink, and a swabbing from the handle of the butter knife. Forensic biologists from the GBI analyzed the evidence and made the following conclusions. Chemical examination of the blade of the knife collected from the kitchen sink indicated the presence of amylase, an enzymatic constituent of saliva. DNA obtained from the swabbings from the blade of the knife contained the DNA profiles of 2 individuals. The primary DNA profile obtained from the swabbing from the blade of the knife matched the profile of Joseph Rosenbaum. The secondary profile obtained from the swabbing from the blade of the knife matched the profile of Laila Daniel. DNA obtained from the swabbings from the handle of the knife contained the DNA profiles of 2 individuals. The primary profile obtained from the swabbings from the handle of the knife matched the profile of Laila Daniel. Due to limited data, no conclusions could be made regarding the donor of the additional DNA alleles obtained from the swabbings from the handle of the knife. Number 5. On November 24, 2015, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the following evidence: a sealed package containing swabbings collected from the kitchen floor. Chemical examination of the swabbings failed to reveal the presence of amylase, an enzymatic constituent of saliva. Number 6. On June 21, 2019, the state of Georgia received photographs from the defense. The date and time the photographs were taken are accurately reflected in these photographs' file names, date, and timestamp provided to the state of Georgia on June 21, 2019. The dates on the back and front of the photos reflect the date the photo was taken. These stipulations have been agreed upon by both the state and the defense. Signed by Assistant District Attorney Daisha Young and signed by Attorney for the Defense, Ms. Karima.
The court accepts the stipulation. Stipulation are facts agreed to by the parties. State calls next witness.
State calls investigator Tina Fleming. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
My name is Tina Fleming, Tinafleming.
Ms. Fleming, how are you currently employed?
I am the supervising investigator over the Sexual Exploitation and Crimes Against Children Unit at the DeKalb County District Attorney's Office.
And what are your roles as an investigator?
They are to prepare cases for court. After we receive the cases from the police agencies, we do any follow-up that is necessary as requested by the assistant district attorneys or what we believe is necessary to prepare the case for court.
And are you one of the investigators assisting on State of Georgia versus Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum?
Yes, I am.
Did you receive an investigative request regarding some business records on this particular case?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall when you received that request?
The request to obtain the records?
Correct.
I believe it was last Friday.
And
Not the Friday that just passed, but the one previously.
who is the person who asked you to do that request?
That would be you.
And what specific records were you asked to inquire about?
I was asked to obtain the Banana Republic employment timesheet for the time period of June 28th of 2015 for both Whitney Kimball and the defendant Jennifer Rosenbaum.
And did you only request that date, or was it a wider date range that you requested?
I decided to request their records for June of 2015 through 11/17 of 2015, which is the date of Layla's death.
And was there a specific reason why you said June 28th of 2015?
June 28th was testified to by Whitney Kimball as a date that she and the defendant Jennifer Rosenbaum both worked together at the Locust Grove Banana Republic store from 12:30 till 6 o'clock p.m. is what she testified to.
And where did you send your request to get additional information?
Initially, I sent my request I called the store first, and they referred me to the corporate office, which is in San Francisco, California, and I went back and forth between that location and the store. I was referred back 3 different times last week, and ultimately, I was able to ask the store to get me in touch with the district manager for the Locust Grove store, who in turn was supposed to turn that request over to the Human Resources Regional Director for this area versus the corporate location. And I did ask them to have her call me.
And were you ultimately able to, did you ultimately receive some records from Banana Republic?
Yes, I did.
And when did you receive them?
This weekend.
I want to show you what's been previously marked as States Exhibit 398. Do you recognize States Exhibit 398?
Yes, I do.
And what is that document?
Okay. It is a business certification of records, which I sent to the representative for, it's Banana Republic, but it's under the umbrella of Gap Inc. I sent them a business record certification that they could fill out, and which they did, and they signed and had it notarized. I also received a copy of the schedule for employee Whitney Kimball from June 3rd, and it goes to September 26th of 2015. In addition, I received a timesheet for the defendant Jennifer Rosenbaum, and her schedule goes from June 14th of 2015 through October 9th of 2015. And then there's a screenshot copy of those Excel spreadsheets as well. And the final page is we needed to have an explanation as to the timesheets and the codes that are on the timesheets because we do not work for them. And so she sent me a copy of the explanation of the timesheet codes for both individuals.
And Your Honor, at this time, I move to admit States 398 as a self-authenticating business record.
Any objection? Admit.
We can put 398 up on the screen, okay?
Yes.
First, let's look at, well, which record are we looking at here? And I'll zoom in since I don't think anyone can read that.
Okay, those are the records for Whitney Kimball. That's her timesheet.
Okay. And I will, we'll zoom in specifically to June 28th. Do you see the records for June 28th for Ms. Kimball?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And I might need to kind of move it over some. What are the records showing regarding Ms. Kimball's work on June 28th of 2015?
She worked 1,500 hours of military time, is 3 p.m., and she concluded her time at 2030 hours, which the easy way as a civilian to figure that out is just to subtract 12 from the first number, so that would put her out at 8:30 p.m. that day, and that she was a cashier.
And so was that different than what the testimony she appeared to provide in court?
Yes, it was.
I also want to now move to the second page of this document. And whose record are we looking at here?
That would be the records of Jennifer Rosenbaum.
Okay. And we're looking specifically at June 27. What does it say regarding, I'm sorry, first of all, is there an entry for June 28th of 2015?
There is no entry for June 28th of 2015.
Is there an entry for June 27th of 2015?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And what does that entry say?
It says that she had 9 hours of UTO.
I'm going to show you the last page of this particular document. And what does UTO stand for according to the Banana Republic?
It indicates on that explanation sheet that it refers to unpaid time off.
What we're looking at on the screen, these were all the dates that Banana Republic had for Ms. Rosenbaum working during the time period in question?
Yes, the time period that I requested. Yes.
Not
Is there any cross?
Yes, sir. These records that you obtained, they don't tell you who was scheduled to work on a specific date, do they?
It does not say who was scheduled. Yes,
Did you
ma'am.
try and get the schedules?
I did ask for that.
And you were unable to get the schedules, weren't you?
I was unable to get the scheduled time, correct.
And these records don't tell you if an employee was paid for working on a certain date, do you?
It shows the hours worked and the pay. That's the pay is the hours worked at the end of the spreadsheet.
Actually, it shows the hours worked, but does not show anything about whether the person was paid or not.
It doesn't have a paycheck, no.
So there are no pay stubs.
No, ma'am.
So we don't know whether Jennifer Rosenbaum was paid for that day or not paid for that day, do we?
We do because the day before indicated unpaid time off, which means that she didn't have any paycheck. So if she had paid time off, it would have indicated such for June 28th of 2015.
But we're talking about the day before. I'm talking about June 28th.
It indicates that she did not have unpaid or paid leave on that day.
But what it says is that there was unpaid, that she was on unpaid leave. It does not
The day
mean-
before.
The day before.
Yes, ma'am.
And on the 28th, there is nothing.
There's nothing indicated for June
And
28th of 2015.
Since these are not the schedules, these don't necessarily correctly reflect whether or not she was at the store on the 28th of June.
It does. It does reflect that she was not there on that day.
It is a document that is produced by the store, but it does not reflect if she was there in another capacity or she was there helping out Ms. Kimball. It doesn't say anything as to that, does it?
It says she wasn't on the payroll for that day.
That's exactly what it says, that she
Yes,
was
ma'am.
not on the payroll. It says nothing about whether she was scheduled to work that day, whether she did work that day, whether just that she did not get paid for that day.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And Whitney testified that she got her information based upon a review of her schedule and Jennifer's schedule, didn't she?
I believe she testified that she went back to find her records as to when she worked.
And she talked about her schedule, not her pay stub, not her timesheets.
I don't recall exactly what she said. I know she said she reviewed her records.
Thank you.
That's right. All right, thank you, ma'am. State the call's next witness.
The state calls Dr. Laura Daniel.
Right here, please.
You raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
You can have a seat. Please state your true and correct name for the record.
Of course, my name is Dr. Laura, L-O-R-A, Darisaw, D-A-R-R-I-S-A-W.
Dr. Darisaw, where do you currently work?
I currently work at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which is the GBI.
And is there a specific division within the GBI that you work in?
Yes, I work for the Medical Examiner's Office.
And what is your title with GBI?
My current title is Director of Pediatric Forensic Pathology.
And what does it mean to be the Director of Pediatric Forensic Pathology?
That basically means that part of my responsibilities are doing many of the pediatric cases or the deaths that involve children. It also means that I have some administrative duties as it relates to our deaths that involve children. And it means that I am responsible for overseeing our program that involves looking at living victims of injury.
And how long have you been in that specific role?
I've had that particular title since October 2014.
How long have you been with the GBI in total?
In total, I did my fellowship training there from 2001 to 2002, and then I was hired on there following that as an associate medical examiner. That was in 2002. During that time, I held the position of deputy chief medical examiner starting in July 2009, and then as I mentioned, in October 2014, I became the director of the pediatric service.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what exactly a medical examiner is?
A medical examiner is a doctor that practices forensic pathology. And forensic pathology is the branch of medicine that deals with determining generally how people die when there are instances where there may be legal matters.
And what is the difference between a medical examiner and a coroner?
The primary difference is that a coroner is an elected official and is not a doctor, whereby a medical examiner is a licensed physician.
And pediatric forensic pathology, is that a subspecialty of forensic pathology?
There are actually two separate disciplines of pathology. Forensic pathology is one subspecialty of pathology, and pediatric pathology is another subspecialty of pathology. Pediatric being just dealing with children ages less than 17. And so I have board certification and training in both of those separate areas.
And to get board certification and training, let's actually talk a little bit more about your education. Can you
Sure.
tell us about your educational background?
Absolutely. I received my Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I then received my medical doctorate degree with honors in research from the Medical College of Wisconsin. Following that, I did 4 years of specialty residency training in pathology at the hospitals of the Medical College of Wisconsin. Following that, I did 2 years of specialty training, which is called a fellowship in pediatric pathology. And I did that at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas. And that was through the Baylor College of Medicine program. And then following that, I did 1 year of fellowship in forensic pathology at the GBI. And that was through the Medical College of Georgia. During my time working at the GBI, I received a master's degree in public administration from Columbus State University.
Did you also receive a master's in any other disciplines?
No, I did do graduate school work in as a master's program in University of Missouri St. Louis. That was between receiving my bachelor's degree and medical school. But I completed 1.5 years of that 2-year program, and the final semester is when I started medical school.
And what were you studying then?
Molecular biology at University of Missouri St. Louis.
Now, you mentioned that you are board certified. Can you tell us what board certifications you have, all of them?
Yes, I'm board certified in anatomic, clinical, pediatric, and forensic pathology.
Have you ever held any academic positions?
Currently, I have a position as an assistant clinical professor with Augusta University, which is the medical college in Augusta.
Now, as a medical doctor, do you have to undergo continuing education?
Yes, sir.
And do you do that?
Yes, sir, I do.
Have you ever presented in any national or regional trainings in the field of forensic pathology or pediatric forensic pathology?
Yes, I've presented at conferences several times in the state of Georgia, a few times in other states in the country, and one time internationally.
Have you ever testified in a court of law?
Yes, I have.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert in the area of pediatric forensic pathology?
Yes, sir, I have.
And do you know approximately how many times that is?
How many times I've testified?
How many times you've been qualified as an expert?
207 times I've testified, and I've been qualified as an expert in all of those.
Have those been here in the state of Georgia?
Yes, they've all been in the state of Georgia.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask the court to declare Dr. Darisaw as an expert in the field of pediatric forensic pathology.
She's so clever.
Thank you, Judge. Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at a very basic level, what is an autopsy?
At a very basic level, an autopsy is a medical procedure that is done to determine the cause of a person's death.
And why would an autopsy, what are some of the reasons why an autopsy would be completed?
Well, an autopsy is completed to determine a person's cause of death.
And do you know approximately how many autopsies you have conducted?
To date, I've performed 5,230 autopsies.
And pediatric autopsies, are there any differences in how an autopsy may be conducted for a child?
There are not necessarily any differences because obviously the child has the same body parts and things as an adult, so the autopsy procedure is the same. But of course, children have different diseases that affect them that don't affect adults, so the causes of death would be different. In addition to just the autopsy itself, following the autopsy to be able to make a determination of the cause of death, there are other pieces of information that's needed, such as the medical history of the person, the investigative information in terms of the circumstances of that person's death. So with pediatric cases, there tends to be a lot more involvement in looking at their birth history and all of their medical conditions as opposed to with adults.
Is there anything different about the length of time that a pediatric autopsy may take?
No, the length of time of an autopsy is all dependent upon what the findings actually are. Some of the autopsies that take a long time may be autopsies when there are a lot of injuries that have to be documented. So the length of time is dependent upon the actual findings and the cause of the death.
Now you mentioned that you've done a lot of autopsies. Do you have any idea as to how many of those autopsies you've conducted have been on pediatric?
Yes, 1,287 have been pediatric autopsies.
Dr. Darisaw, when the body dies in general, kind of what happens to the bodily processes? As far as things like bruising or the further development of how the body may process things?
Well, when the body dies, obviously the heart stops, all of the body organs stop functioning. So when that happens, there's no more responses of the body to, as we know, the body is very capable of responding to injuries and diseases. It tries to heal itself, but when the body's dead, those processes don't happen anymore.
What about the flow of the blood throughout the body? What happens to the blood when the body dies?
The flow of blood stops, the heart stops. The blood is still in the vessels, so it still sits there and it just settles because it doesn't move anymore. So there's the blood is still within the pipes, if you will, the vessels of the body, but it's not moving as it would be when someone is alive.
Okay. And how about the organs? What happens to the organs themselves when the body dies?
The organs stop functioning.
Now, what about bruises? Can someone who is deceased, can they bruise?
No, they cannot, not in the sense of a bruise. When we talk about a bruise, we are talking about something that happens to a live person. In a dead person, of course, as I mentioned, blood is still in the vessels. So if something disrupts those vessels, that blood will come out. And we consider that pseudo-bruising, that it may look like a bruise. So you can have some discolorations in a dead person from disruption of vessels, but since the blood is not pumping, we don't call those bruises. There may be effects of a pseudo-bruise, and most pathologists are able to decipher real bruises that occur when a person is alive versus blood that comes out of a vessel just because it's in the vessel.
In a living person, how do bruises form, or why do bruises form?
Bruises form when there are impacts enough to break and disrupt a vessel, and that's what a bruise is. A bruise is blood that is outside the vessel and then shows itself underneath the skin surface. So, I mean, we all, of course, are accustomed to bruises. We hit our hand or hit some part of our body on something, and then it bruises, because what has happened, we have injured a blood vessel, and the blood has come out of that vessel and has shown itself underneath the skin, and that's what a bruise is. It's a blunt impact injury.
Now, if someone, I guess, is in medical distress, and that perhaps their heart is not pumping and their blood pressure is dropping, would that affect the body's ability to bruise?
Yes, absolutely. So the way a bruise looks in terms of its size and how extensive it is has to do with a couple of factors. One of the factors is how significant the force is. Of course, if we have a light impact, it's going to be a smaller bruise. A very significant impact is going to be a larger bruise. Another factor is where it is on the body. Some body surfaces, the bruise will be larger. Things such as over a bony surface, over your eyebrow, versus a thigh or a butt bruise. You have to have a lot more impact on parts of the body that have a lot more fat or muscle. And then the other aspect is how vigorously the heart is beating, and so how much blood is going through the vessel and how fast that is. So when your heart is beating very, very faintly, particularly when you're dying, then impacts to a body surface won't cause very large bruises or things that you see very significantly.
How about whether or not a bruise can continue to heal after death? Is that possible for a bruise to continue to heal or develop after death?
Well, sir, as we talked about, the death process means that the body has stopped functioning.
Now, before you conduct an autopsy, what type of information do you typically have?
The type of information that we have is the information about the circumstances of that person's death. At the GBI, we rely upon information coming from coroners in the counties that we have jurisdiction over. So the coroners provide information in terms of the circumstances of the death. For instance, this was a 90-year-old lady that was in her bed. The previous night she ate, and her husband said she was fine. So these are the type of things, information we get. What happened? What were the circumstances? This was a person that was in a motor vehicle accident. That's what we get. And then the autopsy, the actual extent of the autopsy depends upon the information provided. So with an autopsy, sometimes we do just an external examination and draw blood for toxicology analysis. Sometimes we do what's considered a partial examination that documents injuries, for instance, in maybe a motor vehicle accident. And then oftentimes we'll do a full autopsy.
And did you do an autopsy of Laila Daniel?
Yes, I did a complete autopsy on Laila Daniel.
And do you, why, let me ask you this, is there a certain statute that requires autopsies in the state of Georgia of young children?
Yes, there's statutes for certain types of autopsies in the state of Georgia. That would be cases where people have sustained violent trauma from another person, such as in gunshot wounds or stab wounds. We do autopsies in cases where a person has died suddenly and unexpectedly, where the cause of death would not be established by any other physician present at the time. Children under 17, there are certain statutes that require an autopsy in many instances, but not all.
Do you recall the date that Laila Daniel died?
I believe that date was November 17, 2015.
And do you recall the date that you conducted the autopsy?
I performed the autopsy on November 20th, 2015.
And is that a standard amount of time to conduct an autopsy?
That's a little bit longer than usual, but it's within the standard time. Normally the autopsy will be done the next day or maybe within 2 days, but within 3 days is not an unusual amount of time, and that has been done on several occasions at our office.
Okay, and is there anything about that delay that would affect the results of the autopsy?
No, sir.
Now, who was present, if you recall, at Laila Daniel's autopsy?
At our medical examiner's office, there's going to be a lot of people present just in the autopsy suite, if you will. There are 8 different stations, and other doctors are working on other cases. Along with the doctors there are the assistants that are performing the autopsies. But outside of just our staff that were in the autopsy suite, not necessarily focused on Layla's case as I was, there were law enforcement individuals, as well as some individuals from DFACS, or the Department of Family and Children's Services, as well as the coroner of the county attended Layla's specific autopsy.
If a body is preserved, how similar is the body to as it was when the person died versus when they get to you?
Well, we don't expect any differences. When the body has died and it's in a cooler, which it would have been at I believe she arrived to our office on the 18th, which was the day after she died. Prior to that, presumably she was at the hospital cooler. And so there's no changes otherwise in the body that would alter the autopsy done on that day versus on the 17th when she died.
And do you do anything to memorialize the autopsy itself?
During the course of the autopsy, photographs are taken to document any findings, and an autopsy report is finalized.
And Dr. Darisaw, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as states 232, along with states 400 through 472. With one exception, there's no state 418, okay?
Sure.
Do you recognize these particular photographs?
Yes, sir, I do.
And how do you recognize these photographs?
These are photographs that were taken under my direction at the time of autopsy that I did on Layla. And within each of the photographs, there's a placard that has the unique identifying number that was assigned to this particular case at our office.
And do these documents, or do these photographs fairly accurately represent the autopsy that was conducted on November 20th of 2015 of Layla Daniel?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I move to admit states 232, along with states 400 through 472 minus 418.
Admitted.
Now, before we start going through the photographs, Doctor, I want to, you made a couple of findings or notations in your record. You said that rigor, you made a notation of rigor that it was fixed. What does that mean?
Rigor mortis is or rigor, some people say rigor, I say rigor. That is the process of the muscles of the body becoming stiff after death. And so I made note that Layla's body was still stiff at the time of autopsy. But then, of course, she had been refrigerated as well.
And were there any decompositional changes to Layla during the examination?
There was not.
And what are you talking about when you talk about decompositional changes?
What we're talking about with decompositional changes is that after the body dies, bacteria starts to accumulate in the body, and over time you start with green discoloration, then the body may become bloated all the way to the point where there's skeletonization. But in this case, the body was still preserved. There had been no prolonged exposure to outside elements that would cause the body to start to become decomposed.
When you begin your examination, what is the first thing that you do when you begin an examination?
Well, generally the first thing that's done is the body is received at our office in a body bag with labels on the back that have the identification of the person. We take photographs of the outer part of the bag to show the name, and then the bag is open and photographs are taken of just how the body is received before anything is done.
I'm showing you States Exhibit 400. Is this how the Layla's body was received when you first began the autopsy?
Yes, sir, it is.
And all of these things that we see on here, what are those? What are all of these things that we see on her?
So what we're seeing on her is the medical therapeutic devices that were placed on her with the resuscitation efforts by EMTs in this case. So this is how she was received. This is the photograph taken just after the body bag is open. And all of the medical therapeutic devices are still on the body, and that's recommended, and that should be the case so that we are able to see what's on the body, and if there is any changes to the body that may have occurred from those, we're able to note that.
As a result of your autopsy, was any of the medical intervention that was done, did that have any impact on her cause of death?
No, sir.
States 401. What is this photograph?
This is a photograph of Layla's body after all the medical therapeutic devices are removed. This shows the front of her body, an overall photograph.
And states 402.
And this is an overall photograph of the back of the body after all the medical therapeutic devices are removed.
The photograph, did you ultimately shave her head?
Yes, in this particular autopsy, during the course of the external examination, I identified several injuries to her head. Like normally, if there are injuries to a person's head, such as a gunshot wound or bruise, we will shave the area just around the injury to facilitate documenting that with photographs. When numerous injuries are found, such as in this case, it necessitated me shaving the entire head. But this would not be the normal case in an autopsy, but in this particular case, I did shave all of the hair on the head because several injuries were identified.
I'll show you within United States 232. What are we looking at, States 232?
This is a photograph of the face. This is one of our typical photographs that we take in all cases, is to take a facial identification photograph. But in this photograph, there are some injuries that we see already.
Okay. Dr. Harrison, I left the electronic pointer up there for you, if you want to use that, and I have one too. You mentioned some injuries. What do you see when you look at States 232 as far as injuries that you can observe?
In looking at this photograph, starting from the top where the hairline would have been, there's an abrasion or scrape of the skin on the right side of the forehead. We see a couple of abrasions on the end of the nose. Let's go back up here. There's a bruise on the left side of the front of the scalp. There's a red mark, looks like an abrasion on the lower lip.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this before we go any further. You mentioned having a history. What information, if any, did you have at the time of autopsy regarding what had happened to Laila Daniel?
As it relates to the circumstances that we were provided concerning Layla's death, information was that she was home with her, I believe it was a foster mother, as well as an older sibling. There was information that she appeared to be choking during an eating event. After that, the foster mother provided resuscitation intervention. The Heimlich maneuver was provided as what happened, and then some other aggressive CPR, at which point in time later 911 was called. 911 got to the house, continued CPR. She was transported to the hospital, but was pronounced dead essentially upon arrival.
Since the autopsy, have you also reviewed any other information regarding the history or an account of what happened inside that home?
Yes, I have reviewed 911 audio recordings. I've reviewed transcripts and the video recordings of interviews with the foster mother, giving her statements of what happened on that particular day. I've also reviewed medical records of the child from the terminal hospitalization. I've reviewed forensic interviews and interview with law enforcement that was done with Layla's sibling.
Just as an overview, and then we'll kind of unpack this and go through all the individual injuries. Did you have, as a result of this autopsy, did you come to any results as to any significant findings that led to the death of Laila Daniel?
Yes, I did.
And what were your findings, your significant findings in this case?
The very significant findings was that on the external surface, and you saw those in the overall photographs, was that Layla had numerous bruises on many parts of her body, ranging from and extending from her head all the way down to her legs. The most prominent bruises were on her back, and that involved generally, or actually the entirety of the back for the most part, extending from the neck all the way down to the butt area. In addition to all of the external injuries, there were very significant internal injuries that involved the abdomen. The organs inside her abdomen were injured, and those were the liver, the pancreas, the supporting tissues of the small and large intestine, which are called the mesentery. Those were injured. Because of those injuries, there was internal bleeding. And in addition to that, she had a lot of bruises on her head that were identified not only on the external surface, but when I reflected the scalp.
So when you say you reflected the scalp, what do you mean?
When I say reflect the scalp, part of the autopsy examination is to look at the brain, and the way one is able to take the brain out is to make a cut across the scalp from one ear to the other and then reflect it. It's kind of like pulling back the covers on your bed. And, you know, when the covers are on your bed, you'll see the external surface, but when you pull them back, you'll see what's under there. And sometimes what you find underneath is different from what you see on the outside. So we're able to do that with the scalp. That also allows me to look at the skull to see if there's any fractures. Then the skull is removed and the brain is taken out.
You mentioned something about being able to see things inside. Is it possible for there to be signs of trauma internally that are not seen on the outside of the body?
That's correct, and that is why an autopsy is performed, because there's a lot of issues happening on the inside, particularly as it relates to trauma, that is not evident from the outside.
Now, regarding an airway obstruction, how would a child typically respond if their airway was fully blocked? Like, what kind of external signs would you expect to see of the child while they were living if their airway was blocked?
Well, the first thing that happens when your airway is blocked, whether you're a child or an adult, and I think this is something that everyone is familiar with, is you reflexively start to cough. Something goes down your airway instead of your esophagus where it should go, and you start to cough. That's a reflexive thing that you're trying to free the obstruction on your own. Over time, you then may have these spasms of coughing where you're trying to cough it up. That progresses to difficulty breathing, maybe not being able to speak because your airway is blocked.
With what you observed from Ms. Rosenbaum's interview with police, did what she described appear to be the signs of a child choking?
What I observed and what she described, I would say would not be what I expect or commonly see when someone has an event where their airway is blocked by a foreign object. The idea of choking may be a word that is confused with actually airway obstruction by a foreign body. So what I observed is a description of the child having choking was the word used, but in the description she describes that the child's head kind of moved back, her arms were moving, her legs were moving, and her whole body was kind of moving such that it was a little bit distracting to her. And that's a description of actually a seizure. I mean, we know that when we're talking about arms moving, legs moving, the whole body shaking, the word seizure was not used by her, but that's a description of a seizure. So this appeared to me to be a child that was having a seizure that was then, with her head moving back. At one point in time, there is a description of her eyes rolling back in her head. And again, these are all features of a seizure and not of a foreign body obstruction of the airway, coughing and trying to free a foreign body in the airway.
Now, when I hear seizure, I think of something like epilepsy. Is that the only thing that can cause a seizure, or seizure-like activity?
Well, epilepsy is an actual natural disease process where one has seizures on a regular basis through life. But also at the time of death, depending on what the circumstances are, you have terminal seizures. Terminal seizures are quite frequent with head trauma. They're quite frequent with various types of trauma where you have blood loss. And so as you have blood loss, your body is starting to go into shock because blood is not flowing in the vessels, supplying oxygen to all your organs, but your body is going to shock. You're losing blood. And those are the type of things that cause these seizures as one is dying. And so the whole scenario and events that I have reviewed are a description of a child that is going into shock, as opposed to as a child that has a foreign object, such as food. In this particular case, the suggestion was that she had choked on chicken. The description is not consistent with that at all.
Is the description that she gave consistent with the internal injuries that you observed at autopsy?
Yes, absolutely. So what I observed and what I've previously testified to is that the autopsy, at the time of autopsy, I identified significant blunt impact trauma to the abdomen. There was a liver laceration. There was a laceration of the pancreas. The laceration of the pancreas actually separated it into two pieces, and there was internal bleeding. And so, given those findings that I found at autopsy, the description of everything that was happening is quite consistent with the fact that she had this trauma, and then these are the symptoms of the trauma. She's starting to have a seizure, her head is falling back, her eyes are rolling back, she's not breathing very well, and then this could be considered, choking type thing because she's gagging, she's not breathing, she's having seizures. These are all things that are expected and commonly seen with people that have trauma and are losing blood and are going into shock, and then, as in this particular case, she eventually died.
Now, how quickly after the traumatic injury could someone start to show signs of what you described?
Well, the signs of what I would describe with abdominal trauma, particularly if you don't have very significant head trauma along with it, the abdominal trauma is not going to cause an instantaneous or immediate death. And then, of course, it depends on how extensive the trauma is. When there are very extensive traumatic injuries to an organ that has a lot of blood vessels, the time of death will be quicker. I can say in Layla's autopsy, based upon everything that I did with the autopsy, including the external examination, the internal examination, I took samples of the injured organs, I looked at them under the microscope. It's most consistent with the trauma having occurred about an hour, give or take some time or so, a few minutes, not an hour to 4 hours, but around an hour before she actually exhibited the symptoms that were described.
And the symptoms that she described could have been the outward manifestation of the trauma that was previously inflicted. Is that correct?
That's exactly what appears to have happened, that she had a traumatic event about an hour or so before she was at the table and exhibited these symptoms.
Now that hour frame could also be a little bit shorter, correct?
Yes.
Now, if something was obstructing the airway and it had not been expelled, would you expect to find that foreign object when you conducted the autopsy?
Absolutely.
And when you conducted the autopsy, did you find any chicken?
No, and when I conducted the autopsy, I didn't find any food particles in the trachea. So the trachea it's a tubular structure. It's where the air goes into the lungs. And so it's a tube, and then it branches into two major branches as it goes into the right and left lungs. I did not find any food particles in either region of the trachea, in the top part as it goes down, nor when it branched into the lungs.
How about the stomach? Did you find any evidence of chicken in the stomach?
The gastric contents or the stomach contents that were identified at autopsy was just very well digested material. I was not able to identify any particular identifiable food particle. So it was just digested material that was a certain color, but I didn't find any intact food particles that I would be able to identify as, oh, this is chicken or this is rice.
Now, does the digestion of food continue after death?
No, it does not.
Would you have expected if she was eating something as stated that you may find something in her stomach?
Normally, if one eats very shortly before death, we will be able to identify the food itself because it hasn't been digested yet.
I want to go through some of the photographs. I'm going to show you States Exhibit 404. What are we looking at in States 404 that was significant to you at the autopsy?
So this is, again, the scalp after the hair has been shaved. This would be the face here, the back. You can see her left ear here. On the back of the scalp, there's a large bruise. This is this red-colored bruise on the back. There's several scratches or abrasions. An abrasion is a scratch. When you skin your knee, things like that, that's an abrasion, or scratches. So we have all of these scratches and abrasions linear on the scalp. There's some back here, on the back of the scalp, on the top, on this left side. There's another abrasion here. More towards the top and the front, you can see a hint on the surface of bruising. This becomes much more evident when I reflect the scalp, as I previously talked about. Sometimes, and obviously we see things a lot better as pathologists because we can look on the inside of the body. But we can see the bruising here. We'll see it a lot better when I reflect the scalp. So there's a lot of injuries on her head, bruises and abrasions.
Now, to be fair, you stated that you observed an extensive amount of bruising over her entire body, correct?
Yes.
Could some of the bruises that you observed have come from child's play or accident?
Some of the bruises were in areas where it's expected to find bruises in a child of this age. So in a child of this age, there are locations where we expect to find bruises. We expect to have bruises in a child, maybe on their forehead, the back surfaces of their arms or front surfaces of their legs, because children run, they fall, their knees get skinned, they have bruises on their knees, the front parts of their body. So yes, I found things of that nature. But there are other locations where you never typically see children getting bruised in regular activities that a 2-year-old would do. So she had bruises over areas of her pubic area. She had very extensive bruises on the entirety of the back. Those are not locations that we expect and commonly encounter when children of this age just have activities of normal living.
Now, when we're looking at States 404, kind of the top of her head, are any of these injuries typically consistent with, say, accident?
Well, in isolation, if one looks at one of these injuries in isolation, any one of them could be a bruise that maybe a child gets. In isolation, a bruise on the back of her head certainly can happen. If a child falls and hits the back of their head, of course you'll have a bruise there. In isolation, if you have a scratch on the top of your head, yes, absolutely.
Now,
but with all of these on her head, it's quite concerning that these would be from a simple event that a 2-year-old would encounter.
Now, did you count up the number of injuries that you observed on Layla's head and neck?
Yes, I did.
And how many injuries did Layla have just on her head and neck?
So what I do in my autopsy, especially when there are a lot of injuries, and this may be blunt force injuries or gunshot wounds or stab wounds, I'll categorize everything into locations, and then I'll describe them by numbering them. And the numbers don't mean this is how they occurred, or it doesn't mean that one is more severe than the other. But in this particular case, I listed 22 injuries involving the head and neck area.
Go through some of these photographs, okay? Showing you stage 405. What are we looking at in stage 405 that you found significant when you conducted the autopsy?
This is the left side of the face and head. So we saw this in the other picture, but we can see more its location. This is an abrasion. We can see an injury on her ear, over the surface of her ear, which is another type of area that was considered quite concerning, that ears are not typically injured in accidental manners in children. So this is a location of an injury here that's quite concerning. Again, we see, bruises. They're kind of faint yellow-brown here. We'll see how that looks on the inside more than on the outside. So that's the left side of her face.
Now, you mentioned that the colors of bruising. Can you tell us a little, are you able to accurately date a bruise simply based upon the color?
It's pretty simple for probably anyone in this courtroom to be able to differentiate a bruise that's fresh versus old just by looking at it. Because we all are very familiar with bruising has a very well-recognized process of first being kind of a reddish color, and over time it becomes brownish yellow, and everyone is kind of familiar with, oh, yeah, I bruised my arm a week ago, that's why it looks like that, or I just bruised it, it's red. But in terms of being able to talk about whether a bruise is an hour old or 1 day, it's not a precise science, but the pathologist has a couple of other options outside of just being able to look at the bruise just on the outside. I'm able to make a cut into the skin and look at the skin, what it looks like underneath the bruise. I'm able to take a sample of the bruise and look at it under the microscope. So that allows me to get some better degree of accuracy and at least giving an estimation of how old a bruise may be. Certainly it's not a specific time, that occurred 4 hours ago, but generally given a range of, oh yeah, that's a bruise that probably happened in that day or maybe 2 days ago. So a pathologist is able to do that, and I would say that all of us in this courtroom are able to say that looks old, that looks fresh, and be quite accurate in that judgment.
Now, I think we'll look at stage 406. Is this another view of something we've looked at?
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, I want to show you stage 407, which is a close-up of the left ear. Now, you mentioned that this is concerning, and what could this type of injury be consistent with?
I described this, I just made a description of this. I talked about the fact that it's a red injury with skin loss. So you can see how you can have the skin losses here. It is dry. There is some drying artifact to it because this is a dead person. This could be an abrasion, or another option may be a burn even. It doesn't particularly look like a thermal injury, but it certainly could be a burn. If one is accustomed to having burns on the ear, maybe from hair products, they can look like this. But it's an injury on the ear. It's a very odd location for a 2-year-old to have this injury. If it's an abrasion, the type of events that may happen would be pulling on the ear very vigorously and strongly. Those can cause abrasions on the ear, pinching the ear hard.
I'm going to show you stage 409, which is the back of that same ear.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Let's check this moment.